We're here in Lexington, Kentucky at Valvoline headquarters, where we'll be making our special blend of motor oil to see if we can get just a little bit more horsepower out of the Civic. We've got the Civic in Valvoline's shop because we're going to blend a custom oil to put in the car. Dr. Warholic, who's the lead scientist at Valvoline, is going to walk us through everything.
I'm Mike Warholic. I'm the technology manager for light-duty lubricants here at Valvoline. So my group is responsible for all engine oils, transmission oils, gear oils, anything that's related to light-duty lubricants, our group takes care of. This is our technology laboratory. We call our new products development laboratory here in Lexington. So this facility was built about 20 years ago. This is where all of our global R&D occurs for new products within Valvoline. We have several different laboratories. The first one I'm going to take you into is where we do a lot of our small-scale blending and our initial testing of lubricants. If you take a standard engine oil and break it down, it actually has several components. The biggest component in an engine oil is base oil. So this is what's going to go in your oil that we're going to blend today, is a base oil. You can see how clear it is. If you look at most engine oils, they're darker, they have a brownish tint. That's because of the additives.
Wow.
But the oils are actually fairly pure, right? And they're fairly clean. They look like water in the container.
If that was in my engine, I'd be worried.
Yeah,
but I guess it is.
Now that engine, that oil would last in your engine. It would lubricate your engine. The problem is that oil would start breaking down over time because it doesn't have the protection that it needs. But all oil, when it's in a very hot environment and exposed to, say, acids and things, it will break down over time.
Okay.
So the additives we put in not only are there for performance, they're there to protect that oil that's in that beaker right there, to keep that oil integrity the same throughout the lifespan of the drain interval. So this is just an example of the building blocks that go into a normal engine oil. We already talked about the base oil. What Ben has there is actually a friction modifier, and these friction modifiers, what they do is they actually adhere to the metal surface and they decrease the friction between those surfaces, so making your engine more efficient over time. This is maybe 0.25 to 0.5% of the overall formulation. You don't need a lot. So if you put too much in, they can actually fall out of solution, and you can actually get sediment and you can get instabilities in the oil. So you have to balance these things appropriately. The anti-foamant is actually in a light solvent. And part of also for anti-foamant is you need parts per million of these molecules to prevent foaming of your oil, which is becoming more of an issue, especially for you at high RPMs, but also in on-road vehicles because the engines are getting smaller. And they're running also at a higher RPM. You get more churn and you can get foam forming. One thing we really worry about is the wear performance. So we use several different anti-wears additives in standard oil. In racing oil, we use some more sophisticated molecules. But the most common one, which you guys probably heard of, is zinc. It's like the perfect molecule for wear protection. And actually what it does is it actually breaks down at a certain temperature and forms a coating on the metal surface. Now we also have other anti-wear. So the friction modifier you picked up earlier, we call it a friction modifier, but this friction modifier is also an anti-wear component. So we have several components in oil that do multiple jobs.
The oils that we have laid out here are for my custom blend that we're gonna make for my Civic. We're gonna call this blend the Speed Sauce. Every component added is measured down to the 10,000th of a gram because this ratio is very important to make sure the blend is right where we need it. There's so many different aspects to making the right oil that it makes my head spin, but we'll go through some of the details of that later in this video.
What is this?
This is the detergent package. So it has all of the goods in there that's going to keep your engine clean and running as well as it can. So it has the majority, it's the largest treat rate of the additives. So the viscosity modifier is super, super thick.
Wow, it's like melted glass.
We're gonna add about 70 grams of anti-wear for their finished blend. And it's a lot thinner than the VM, so it has better flow. We have decided to add red dye. So we're gonna add a couple grams of this. All right, so the speed sauce is made. He did an excellent job. Now it's time to get it mixed up so we can get it in the car. So this is how we're gonna stir it. And when we do smaller blends, we will just use a little magnetic stir bar and put it on the hot plate. But when we're using these bigger blends, we're making 3 gallons. So we're gonna use this overhead stir. So I'm gonna put this inside our speed sauce. And then when I set the speed, it'll twirl this and get everything mixed in really well. And we're also going to put it on heat. So we set it at about 90 C. And we'll let it blend for an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours, just until it really gets mixed in thoroughly and we make sure that viscosity modifier is melted. We want to make sure that it is completely homogenized, and then we'll let it cool. We'll sample it and run some testing on it just to confirm that we've made what we planned on making. We've taken a sample of the speed sauce and I've loaded it into the carousel and it'll pull up the sample for testing.
This machine is testing the viscosity of our newly blended oil.
You can buy a 30 weight, and if you put it in your vehicle, it could actually shear down to a 20 weight pretty quickly. At Valvoline, we actually formulate our oils to basically stay in grade, what we call stay in grade. So if you buy a 5W30 from us, it'll stay at 5W30 even with some shear in the end, which is inevitable. The oil you blended this morning is a low-end 30 weight, primarily because we wanted to get you a little more horsepower. And one of the best ways to get more horsepower is viscosity.
While we're waiting on our Centistoke test to be complete, Dr. Warholic gave me a tour of their lab. Valvoline's headquarters is very impressive. There's so much that goes into oil that you don't really think about.
Oil shearing is a big deal because in engines there's lots of moving parts, right? There's lots of metal parts moving next to each other, and oil can break down. The polymer we use for viscosity control can get torn apart. It can also get realigned and the viscosity can drop. And so we have a test to measure the amount of shear stability of an oil. And what we do is we pressurize the oil through basically a fuel injector, very small orifice, and we create a high shear region. And we do that for 30 cycles. And we measure the viscosity before and the viscosity after, and that gives us the amount of shear loss. You know, like I said, if you buy a 5W30 oil, by the time you run your engine for an hour, it may be a 20 weight oil already. We don't want that to happen. You want to keep your oil in the viscosity range that you purchased or that you want by design, right? You don't want it to thin out. So we have to be able to quantify that, and this machine is what does that. Another thing we're worried about with oil is thermal breakdown. Oxygen is our friend in the combustion chamber, so you want the gasoline to combust and form pressure, but oil doesn't like oxygen. Oxygen is very aggressive and can oxidize the oil itself and break it down. And that thermal oxidation can lead to higher viscosity. It can lead to acid formation, all kinds of bad stuff, and wear and corrosion. So we do have a test called a PDSC. It's a pressure differential scanning calorimeter that measures the amount of oxidation potential of an oil. And basically all you're doing is you're heating up the oil and you feed in oxygen under pressure and you look for a degradation point and you see when the thermal breakdown happens. And the longer the oil can last in this machine, the more stable it is.
Hi, I'm Amy Ross, and I'm the Lubricants Testing Manager for the Valvoline New Products Development Laboratory. This is the ICP. So down here we take molecules and we bust them up into small pieces and analyze what the composition is, okay? So I call it the plasma party. The molecules are dancing around, they're really excited, all the bonds are broken, but eventually everyone has to go home, right? And when they do that, the electrons go back down to what's called their ground state. And when they do that, they give off that energy back to the system in the form of light. So this is a camera, it's called a spectrometer, okay? So the spectrometer takes a picture of the plasma party. So basically, who was at the party and how crazy did they get? How much molybdenum was at that party? How much calcium? Were there any wear metals that snuck in there that weren't supposed to be there, like aluminum, chromium, iron, lead, tin? Those are all indicators of wear. Or sometimes we just want to confirm the additive profile, so we know how much boron, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, zinc, and silicon should be in there. So if somebody modified our products, we will know.
So when you think of those boundary lubrications, like we mentioned, your valve train, your cam, and your lifters, how can we evaluate that? We've looked at the base fluids, we've looked at the piston ring type of contacts. Now what about the gears in your cams, in your lifters? So with your friction modifiers, you also, especially in racing contexts, you have extreme pressures, extreme heat that build up, and you need to analyze that exact additive. So with these two instruments right here, the extreme pressure instruments is how we do that. We'll be running a standard transmission fluid. So this is a 10-second per step test, spins at 1760 RPM. If this test fails, it'll actually create a specimen like this. The sliding contact is so hot and so severe, the specimen will actually bind together. So that was a bad test. The lubricant did not do its job. It got too hot, the additive failed, and it severely welded together.
It looks like our Cinestoke test is complete now, so we can see what the final weight of our oil is.
Right on the money. We were shooting for 10.3. There's a 0.2 variance, roughly, so we're right in target. I think 10.1 to 10.5 would have been ideal. We're at 10.17. So typically a 30 weight is between 9.5 or 9 point something and 12 point something. So we're on the lower end of 30, so it's a little bit of a thinner 30 weight, which is good, because that means we're gonna make more power. Now this is the part that I know how to do. I can change my own oil. That is something I can do. Maybe. It's got all the assembly lube still in it, so it's a good thing we're changing the trans fluid too. All right, we got our speed sauce going in. It looks a little bit like blood.
With the speed sauce in the car and some fresh transmission fluid, we should see some performance gain that might give us a competitive advantage against our opponents. Now, we're headed back to Virginia to finish up some of the remaining items on the car before our first grid life event of the season.
All right, the first thing we're gonna do is weigh the car. Now, I know that we weighed it when we were at Andy's shop, but he said his scales are not the most accurate, so we're gonna weigh it again, and the car is a little bit closer to its final form. We've got the splitter attached this time, so we know the exact weight of everything. The goal is 2,550 pounds with me in the driver's seat. That's the class minimum rules, so that's what we wanna target. So, let's see where we're at, if we're above or below 2,530 pounds, and we'll go from there. If we're too light, we're gonna need to add some ballast weight or fuel. And if we're too heavy, we need to figure out where to take some weight off the car. We weigh 2562. So we're about 30 pounds heavier than I wanna be. The reason for this added weight could be a lot of things. Obviously, the most notable being the roll cage, which I think added about 120 pounds. We compensated for that a little bit by removing a lot of the interior pieces that were in the way of the roll cage, and that helped. But we're still, I would say, 30 pounds too heavy, which means I need to find 30 pounds to take off of this car in order to be at our ideal weight.
I'm thinking I can find most of this weight in the battery. I went to a heavier battery last season because I was actually underweight, but now I can put in my lightweight anti-gravity battery.
This is my solution to most of my weight problems. Got the old battery here, which is a stock size battery, weighs 28 pounds, but the anti-gravity battery weighs 4 pounds. So we've just shaved off 24 pounds right there.
Swapping this battery out should find me most of the weight that I need to lose, but I can also compensate a little bit by running a slightly lower fuel load. So I think I should be good to go on the minimum weight.
When we had the roll cage installed to this car, it's obviously welded to the chassis, and all that heat from the welding has kind of melted away at some of the paint and the undercoating in my wheel wells and a little bit underneath the car. So I've got some rubberized undercoating that I got from Advance, and I'm gonna spray onto this to help kind of reseal that up so it doesn't rust in the long term. My roll cage, my bright championship white roll cage is already getting dirty just from climbing in and out of it. So I'm gonna touch up some sections on it and then probably put some paint protection film on it so it stops getting so dirty so quickly. We thought a white interior was a good idea.
Vinay is here from 2020 Tint and Films, and he's currently wrapping the roll cage in some paint protection film to protect the nice white paint.
All right, now the next thing that we need to work on is this front splitter. As you can tell, it's taken a beating over last year. We made it at the beginning of last season, and I went off track a few times, hit a few curbs, and as you can see, we've got a bunch of scuffs under here. Now, the underside, I'm not too worried about. This doesn't really affect the performance. It's just a little bit aesthetically scuffed up. But this front leading edge, I'm a little more worried about because that actually affects airflow. You want the front leading edge to be very smooth so that the air can roll over it nicely. And well, I've got a few chunks taken out. So we're gonna repair this front leading edge with some fiberglass resin, hopefully smooth out that front a little bit and give it a little bit more durability so that it can make it at least one more season, ideally. I'd like to get another season out of this. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is a larger rear view mirror. I don't know why I didn't do this before. It's literally just an attachment onto the factory mirror, which you can see is like about the size of my hand. And this extension makes it much, much larger, which is great because it's important to have awareness while you're on track. To be able to see around you is always a good thing. And this really opens up your visuals to be able to see around you better. And honestly, it's like 10, 15 bucks at Advance. It's not expensive. I don't know why I didn't do this before. Very simple and very simple install. It literally just clips right onto the factory mirror.
I think the Civic is finally ready to start the season. We definitely have the right recipe here. And now it's time to put it to the test next week at Gridlock.